The television show, while it had material to work with, and a little bit past that, did okay, did great. In fact, I would have said it was the best television show ever produced. And I'm thinking of shows going back to the 70s when I think that one of the best television shows ever produced was Centennial back in the 70s. It was packed full of actors, and I would compare Game of Thrones to it to some degree. But that's a Mishner book for those of you who aren't familiar. Mishner wrote a bunch of books, and each one of them had to be as thick as a Bible. Anyway, Game of Thrones worked as long as they had material to work with. And when they ran out of material, and I think the two producers said, fine, you know what? We don't have the material to work off of. And then this other Star Wars project from Disney came up. We're going to move on to that, and we're hot now, and so we need to get going while we're still hot. They knew this thing was going to go off the rails. They didn't want to work for whatever reason. There was probably also some tension between the executives at HBO and the producers of the show. The part I don't completely understand and don't agree with is why HBO's executives, if I'd been on the HBO executive staff, I would have said, hey, this is a money-making cow. We can produce this thing for another 3, 4, 5 seasons. We can just keep this going and going and going. But it would need better writers and producers than what they had in David and David. And I think that would have been clear. If I'd been on the executive staff, board of directors for the HBO, I would have recommended we go ahead and let David and David finish their contracts and move on to Star Wars so they can go screw that up. Not that it couldn't be any screwed up more than it already is, in my opinion. It's a worthless franchise. I would have brought in new writers, and even if I had to put Game of Thrones on hold for a year or two, as far as the actors go, I think all those actors were willing to sign on for however long it took. And those that aren't, fine, we'll kill those characters off. That's the one thing about Game of Thrones that was great, and that is Martin didn't mind killing characters off. And that's what made it a great show. I always compared it to the show Clint Eastwood did, Unforgiven, because all the characters in Unforgiven are good guys, and all the characters are bad guys. There are no truly white hats or truly black hats. Everybody is guilty of something. I think that's what made it interesting. Now, I know what a lot of you are going to say. Now, you're going to say, all these people we're talking about are highly paid executives. You're talking about executives at HBO that make millions of dollars. You're talking about the producers of the Game of Thrones that are each contracted making tens of millions of dollars, and you're tens of millions of dollars. And you're also talking about Martin, who has made, I don't know how many millions, but we know he's probably made more money than he'll ever spend in his lifetime. And you're going to say, well, people who make that kind of money don't get wrapped up into petty disagreements over turf and the idea that you're using my idea or somebody else's idea, or that egos. In other words, a lot of people come to believe that because you make a lot of money, somehow ego no longer plays a function in the pivotal role of politics, in business, and in any industry, whether it be television or the writing industry or the fabrication business or whatever. No. The human factor is always at work, all the time. The ego can get in the way. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if there's no money involved. I know of operations where its ego gets in the way of nonprofit volunteer organizations. I've been involved in many. Money really doesn't come into play when it comes to this factor. We tend to think it does. We tend to think that if somebody makes a whole lot of money, then they have the wisdom and the prudence to control their virtues and assess the problem from a much wiser position. And nothing could be further from the truth. Don't be misled by this. I guarantee you that the executives of HBO, the producers of the Game of Thrones, David and David, and Martin himself, the author, are just as susceptible to these petty controversies, regardless of how much money is made, regardless of what kind of status we've given them on these pillars, because they're part of these megalithic television production companies. We each have that human factor in us. And if you ignore it, then you're simply deceiving yourself. So my opinion on what's happened up there, now, of course, I don't know any details. I don't know any of these gentlemen. I only know from the interviews that I've seen, just like everybody else, and I can tell you from behind the scenes of my own life and the people I've dealt with, and the back and forth egos that get in the way of our own real lives. And you stop and think about your own life and your own controversies within your own family or within your own company, employees or employers. You stop and think about it. The human factor exists no matter how much money is involved or not involved. It bypasses all of that. Anyway, that's my thoughts on Game of Thrones. Unfortunately, it was a great project, probably the best project ever, and the two idiot producers drove it into the toilet. And now Martin gets to be the hero because he can come back and he can write his 2 books, 6 and 7, and all of the fans who were fans of the books to begin with can look forward to a good ending that it truly explains itself. Because obviously the television show took it and threw everything into the toilet. All the character arcs and storylines just... That's my opinion on barbed wire strategy. I promise I won't always talk about television shows, but this one I had to cover. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.